Ms. Diakite, what has your research shown about standardized testing?
It depends on what type of standardized testing you are talking about. Most of my research has been on the SAT, which is a commonly used standardized test for college admissions. Generally, what I've learned about standardized testing is how the items are designed and how they decide which items to use, and some of the effects standardized testing has had on students in general. So what I've learned is that standardized tests are designed through a very intricate process. There are huge organizations that design tests, and these organizations of course get paid by school systems and whatnot. And so some research goes into how the questions are designed, and one of the things they do is that they pilot questions. So the questions that you guys get, for example, in the park, or that you used to get on the DC cast, they don't just make them up and put them in the book. They usually go through a long testing process. So they first get experts to design the question based on the standards, and then they give pilot tests to students. So they give groups of questions to students, and based on how the students do on the question and how they respond to the question, then they decide whether they want to keep the question or not. So a lot of the processes that that they've gone through to create the test are intended to be fair, but in a lot of ways they aren't fair to some students. And so in a lot of standardized tests, minorities and people who come from poor backgrounds are usually at a disadvantage. There's a big score gap between white students and students who are from wealthy backgrounds. They're usually on the high end. On the lower end are minority students and students who are from impoverished backgrounds. There's a lot to come from it.
Okay. As a former teacher and as an administrator, how has testing changed over the years?
I think that the biggest thing is the push toward Common Core standards. Before, the tests were designed based on the state's actual standards. So almost every state had different standards. So the tests were either designed for those standards, or school systems would choose a particular test that they wanted based on, I guess, maybe what their particular standards were. So now that we have Common Core standards, a lot of the testing is geared toward Common Core standards.
Have you taken one of these tests?
Recently, no. I've not taken any recent tests, although I've been able to look at test items from different tests all over the country. And the last standardized test that I took was the GRE, which is a test that you use to get into graduate school.
Did you like the results that you got from that test?
I've never been satisfied with any of the results I've gotten from the standardized test. I've never been really good at taking tests. So when I first took the SAT, for example, in high school, I did really, really badly on the SAT, although I had really high grades in high school. And I was involved in a lot of things, and I was, one of the top students. But my SAT scores and a lot of my standardized test scores were really low, which is why I've been inspired over the years to do so much research.
Mm-hmm. How do you think standardized testing will affect the classrooms?
I think that it causes teachers to pressure students to do well on the test. So a lot of times teachers feel compelled to teach toward the test so that you guys can do well. Like teach you, testing strategies and, words and things that you might see on the test, or text that you'll see on the test, when in actuality that's not the most effective way to prepare students. And I feel like that you guys miss out on a lot of great things because, we want you to do well on tests. And that's not the teacher's fault. That's normal pressure, if your students have to pass a test.
How are these tests reliable?
So the tests are designed to be reliable only because through the testing process, the way they do the research in order to set up the test, they try to choose items in which students consistently answer it in a certain way. So what these people propose is that based on their testing systems for creating items, based on their research, based on all of these different factors, that the tests are reliable. So in order for a test to be reliable, what they're saying is, in this particular situation, on this particular time, this student can take this test and consistently make a similar score. That means it's reliable. But then, reliability on tests can be arguable. Reliability on tests could be arguable. There are a lot of students who take tests twice and their scores are different each time. So, the question of reliability is kind of up in the air.
What alternatives to standardized tests would you suggest?
I always have been an advocate for authentic and holistic assessments. So assessments that actually test students on things that on skills that they need to use in the real world. So for example, maybe instead of having a test where you have a whole bunch of science questions and you have to know the definition of density or so on and so forth, I think it would be better for you guys to have like maybe a project or something like that in which you use density or which that particular concept is applied. I think only through that can you really tell if a student learned something. Not always through sitting down and taking a test, because not everybody thinks the same way.
Okay, so this is off the paper.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever, like based on my opinion, whenever I usually take the test, it's like because I do good in some classes, I'll get a higher test than mostly other people, and most of them will be much more difficult than others. And then whenever I get I will usually get a middle low score. I would usually get I'm usually a proficient or advanced person whenever I take these tests. I'm mostly, but some of these questions, they phrase them a certain way, which I really wouldn't understand. Is there a reason why they phrase them a certain way so that it's harder to comprehend for some people?
So that goes back to the reliability part, the reliability question you asked me before. When they test these questions, let's say they pick 100 random kids and they give the question to these 100 random kids. If 100 of the 100 kids understood the question, then it would be considered, for example, reliable, okay? However, that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody because they don't give it to every single kid in every single school. So through that whole testing process, there truthfully could be one person who just really didn't get the question. And that's not necessarily a ding on your part. That's just probably meant that you weren't taught it in that way, So, like I said, that whole reliability question is really a gray line, because what is reliable based on the way they test it is not necessarily reliable for every group of students. So if you took, for example, all the kids at Hardy may not have been taught the concept in that way. They've never looked at the question worded in that way, you see? But that doesn't make it that you guys are not as smart as other people. It's just meant that you learned it differently. You see?
Okay.
Well, you have any more questions?
Thank you for your time.
No?
Not really.
Okay.
So, thank you for taking your time out of your day for doing this. I don't know what else to say after this to make it polite, so I'm just gonna end the video right now.